number 3 Georgia, 2.5-point favorite on the road. Number 16 Ole Miss. Man, this is going to be a good one. Over under I have. Pretty obvious here, Will. 3 Carson Beck picks.
Yep.
That's look, 2 consecutive games with 3 picks, 3 consecutive games with multiple picks. Last time that Beck
What improvement from last game if he has 3 picks?
How is that improvement from 3 picks last game? He
had
3.
He had 3? My bad. Sorry, I was counting.
You just steamroll, Mike. I had 3 picks in consecutive games. I get that stat wrong in the over-under. What are we doing?
You're so right. I counted the one we threw right to the DB. You're so right.
I think he would have had 2 picks on the same drive then, so it still would have been 3
point.
Picks.
You're right. Yeah. Sorry, my bad.
3 picks. We're not going to add it.
You're right.
He doesn't need any more picks to be added to his total. It's already at 11. Mm-hmm. The last time that he had fewer than 2 interceptions in a game was October 5th against Auburn. It's been a month. That's not great. Dating back to Bama, 11 of his picks in all 11 come in the last 5 games. Mm-hmm. Not ideal. I did a little bit of digging because this is a question that I think Georgia fans are wondering about. I think college football fans as a whole who are wondering about how vulnerable Georgia is are wondering about this question. How mistake prone can Carson Beck be for a Georgia team that wins a national championship? Because at this point, the 2024 version of Carson Beck is this. It is unrealistic to expect him to just flip the switch and stop turning the football over. Okay? Like it's going to happen. I went back to every post-integration national champ.
Which is a big deal for Ole Miss.
That doesn't include Ole Miss. 1970.
Ole Miss is out of the running if we're talking about that.
Yeah, Texas is always my cutoff. They won the last They won the last segregated national championship. Texas did. So the most interceptions thrown by a QB1 on a title team that I could find. Any guesses?
Oh man, that's still old school football. I'm gonna say
it's actually not.
Oh man, yeah. I'm gonna say let's be generous to their chances here. We're at 11. I'm gonna say 15.
Deshaun Watson had 17 picks.
Okay.
In 2016 when Clemson went on, albeit a 15-game season. It's a little bit different than when you used to have to play 12 games. So that's part of it. But what I thought was a bit more relevant to trying to count for the changes to the sport, because things have just changed in football. There used to be a lot more interceptions, but the volume of passing is also different now than it was before. I thought that looking at pass attempts per interception was a little bit more relevant.
That's great job there, because I literally just did that method. I was like, but there were so many fewer games when Archie was running around and stuff. But you're right, there are more pass attempts, so it all kind of even out. It's great point. Yeah.
So obviously, the higher the number here, the more pass attempts per interception, the better. That means you're not as mistake prone. If you're at 99 or 100 passes per interception, like 2018 Trevor Lawrence was when Clemson won that national title, 2020 Mac Jones was that year, you're in good shape. Carson Beck is currently at 26.4 attempts per interception. Not great. Deshaun Watson, 2016, he was at 34.1 in 2016. But go back and look at the year he had, because he had the interceptions, which was an issue, and it was definitely a talking point throughout that season. Can this continue? But his good was so good that he was still second in the Heisman voting. Yep. He was still an awesome player. He could still turn to his legs. They really turned to his legs a lot more down the stretch, and that was kind of the adjustment that they made after that Pitt loss. And I think he threw he had 70 pass attempts in that game. It was something ridiculous. And then Pat Narduzzi kisses his kicker as he makes the game winner. Just an all-time weird, but also at the same time peak Pat Narduzzi game that was. And Clemson ends up winning the national title that year, even though this really was a trend throughout the entire season. It also helped Deshaun Watson that he had a Clemson defense that was top 5 in yards per play allowed, so they could kind of bail him out of some of these spots. There's actually a closer national champ QB comp to Beck in terms of that attempts per interception stat, if you're wondering. Any sort of guesses if you haven't looked ahead at my notes here?
I did, unfortunately.
Okay, so you know this then. 2003 Matt Mock, 25.6 attempts per interception. The difference is that LSU team in 2003, they ran the ball with a lot more success than Georgia, which is rare to call the Georgia running back room kind of a liability. but they were averaging like 54 rushing yards per game better there. And it was the number one scoring defense in America, led by the best coach in the history of the sport. You get it. The guy had guardrails. You could afford some of these interceptions at times. This thing with Carson Beck feels different. It just does. Kirby has never had a team that averaged more pass attempts per game than rushing attempts. This Georgia team is averaging 7 more pass attempts than rushing attempts, in part because, look, you built the offense around Carson Beck. You spent in the transfer portal to get receivers to come in. That was supposed to be the strength of this team, and the backfield depth with some of the injuries that they've endured during the season is probably not helped. And if you're trying to, play a 16-game season, 17-game season, you need to have running back depth. And that has been a little bit tougher for Georgia to come by. TBD on the Trevor Etienne rib injury, if that's going to limit the backfield even more down the stretch. So all of that is relevant heading into this week against an Ole Miss defense.
I do want to say, and that's why I didn't want to cut you off about that, because I actually the thing about Matt Mock is so interesting to me, because that was prime Jimbo Fisher, where he was slinging that thing. But to your point, it was still a ground and pound defensive team. And yeah, I think that you've hit on that, which is that if Georgia had this, physical between the tackles running game, that was what was so weird about that LSU team, was that they took all these chances that were just let your guy make a play, but they were we don't it was kind of the inverse of what you would imagine a Saban and a Jimbo team being, which is we're controlling this game by running the ball. Let's throw it up. And whereas Georgia needs to throw the ball. That's why I really honestly don't fault Beck as much as I would fault that offensive gameplay for LSU, which obviously worked, but they were just trying to score bonus points some of the time.
Yeah, you're right. This is a different situation for Georgia. They have to be able to throw the ball, especially if you're not going to get these home run plays in the ground game. Mm-hmm. That has just not been an element of this offense yet. And you need sometimes you need to be able to hit on that 30-yard pass play and make life a little bit easier. And you can't necessarily expect to have this perfect success rate on third down. And sometimes you just got to hit a big one. And that the passing game has been pretty much responsible for getting those chunk plays in Mike Bobo's offense. But, you wonder, all right, well, what does that mean against this defense? What does it mean against this Ole Miss defense that is certainly a discussion for best defensive line in all of college football? The most absurd stat for this Ole Miss defense, they have 17 more TFLs than any FBS team. 17 more. It's crazy. I mean, they have these games where it's 15 TFLs for Ole Miss. And that's just become kind of the standard. They will get in this Georgia backfield. And if they don't, Ole Miss doesn't have a chance. Okay? And sure, Jared Ivey might hurt his knee every other play in a non-faking injury sense. I actually do think he gets hurt every other play, it seems like. He's awesome, and he's great. I've been hyping up Jared Ivey for a while since he transferred over from Georgia Tech. But, man, it feels like every time he's involved in a tackle, Jared Ivey's slow to get up. Oh, Jared Ivey's holding his knee. Ole Miss fans, you get it. But here's the crazy thing. After all the preseason conversation we had on this show, anytime you talk about this Ole Miss team, we talked, can they get those guys on the defensive line that can slow down Georgia in this Carson Beck offense after he carved them up for 52 in Athens last year? All right.
Yep.
Half 100 between the hedges. He did that against Ole Miss. That's actually the thing I'm most confident about in this matchup, is that Ole Miss's defensive front is going to make life difficult for Carson Beck. And if you would have told any Ole Miss fan that in the offseason, they would have said, boom, get us to the playoff. We're thinking potential national championship contender. Let's go. I would expect more Carson Beck turnovers in this game. And yes, I said turnovers, plural. I would bank on that. I would expect Ole Miss's defensive additions to continue to be worth all of that NIL money, which they have been so far this year for the most part up front. But I'd be more worried about this Ole Miss offense. I realize that's a strange thing to say about a group that just put up 63 and was doing video game things on that Arkansas defense. It's also a group that's battling some pretty significant injuries right now, with Henry Parrish Jr. out. Caden Priestcorn was out for that Arkansas game, and obviously all eyes are going to be on the availability of Trey Harris. What does it look like for him if he does return? It's first time we're seeing that guy in basically a month since the LSU game. If I'm guessing, Trey Harris plays. Will he be at full go? I don't know. You can beat Georgia deep. This isn't – I don't think it's been an All-American type season for Malachi Starks either. And maybe not enough people are talking about that. But if you look at some of these busts that they've had, even the bust in the Florida game, You're just like, man, he's got his eyes peeking in the backfield too much. He has not had a vintage Malachi Starks season in the way that many expected to. But at the same time, this defense is not 2022 levels of exposed on the back end, where even Garrett Nussmeier was like, buddy, I can chuck it deep against this group in the SEC championship. And he was taking all of those chances. And we wondered if that was going to prevent Georgia from winning a national championship. That did not prove to be the case. But that's what I can't bank on. I can't bank on Jackson Dart getting enough time to be able to stretch the field. I don't know that he will be able to navigate his way behind what should be a healthier Georgia defensive front. I think a healthier Michael Williams is the difference in this one. He played 41 snaps against Florida. It wasn't just obvious passing situations like it was against Texas. I think this is the game where we go, oh yeah, Michael Williams, top 10 pick. There's a reason we were talking about this guy and all that potential. And it's a game where you're reminded that you can be the portal king, which Lane Kiffin is, but if you're not developing on that offensive line, you're in trouble. I think after Ole Miss races out to an early lead in this one, it can't put the game away because it can't run the football. And Georgia gets a late drive from Carson Beck after multiple interceptions, and Georgia wins this game 28-27.
Man, this matchup feels like it's gotten like it started off in the offseason being interesting, and it feels like with every week there's been like a new layer to the possibilities of what this game could be, right? With teams showing, I mean, honestly, both teams have shown more flaws than we thought, right? I don't think there's anything that either team is doing better than we expected them to do.
Ole Miss defensive line.
Ole Miss defensive line is doing better, but they were seen as a huge strength, right? With all the guys they brought in and all that.
They were seen as a group with massive potential. Yes, The Walter Nolan edition changed how we were talking about them. If it had just been Oman Mielen, I think it's a little bit different, and Chris Paul Jr. as well. But I think, and I should really say the Ole Miss front seven, not just the defensive line. But
right.
I would still say that group has exceeded expectations.
Yeah, and obviously Trey Harris, he was in line with your expectations, but I think he kind of let some people know. And so just to kind of sim through all of that, because we've all more or less been here, right? If we got 100% healthy Trey Harris, I could see him frolicking through the Georgia safeties. That is something that is easy for me to imagine. Now, we've seen other guys in Ole Miss step up for sure, but Trey Harris is a difference maker. And I think that once you get to this level of kind of banged up where you're just never right within the context of a football season, and you're a player who's good at deep routes, getting open, leaving people in the dust. It'd be one thing if it was like a tight end or like a Michael Thomas style receiver that would just catch the ball and go down kind of. But I will say that to say, if we were looking at this game logically, if we were doing some, exit polls and tabulation, it would feel like, Ole Miss has a lot of things that I would like about this game. And I'll give you one specific example. Remember last week I said, hey, Tennessee is pretty much better than Ole Miss at everything but quarterback play, but that quarterback play matters. I then proceeded to not pick Ole Miss. Last week, Jackson Dart was able to basically just go Super Saiyan. On a field based on what they've shown right now, Jackson Dart is head and shoulders better than Carson Beck.
I would agree with that. I would agree with he's definitely had the better season. Yeah,
I mean, it's not even statistically eye test. It's not even close. The thing that we didn't like about Jackson Dart was his turnovers, and those are still nowhere near Carson Beck. The thing we liked about Carson Beck was his poise, familiarity with the offense. He's screaming to receivers on third down about not knowing the play, right? So that being said, if you're Ole Miss, it's all going to run through that guy in the D-line. I think you nailed that. I think it's going to be Jackson Dart versus the back end of Georgia's defense, which you've seen has struggled, all right? And Ole Miss's D-line versus Georgia's run game, exactly what you said. They've not found that consistent guy that they can really lean on when it's time to run the ball. Yeah, they can have guys that scoot around. Yeah, they can do in rounds, double reverses. Right. I'm going to pick this one exactly the way I did with LSU Ole Miss and just say, I feel like I've seen this game so many times before. Texas was a version of this game where Kirby's back is against the wall. And I'll say it this way. When these games are close, Georgia doesn't win them. Okay? They don't. They lost the Alabama game after they made it close. When Georgia has a game like this, a la Tennessee 2022, it's kind of a bloodbath. Because, again, like I said, look at Texas. Carson Beck did everything he could to not make that a 30-point win or a 40-point win. This is not a Georgia team that you trust in those moments right now, because their big win has come when their defense has just suffocated Texas on the road. and their quote unquote big loss has come in a moment where they had all the momentum, right? And their quarterback threw a pick to an 18-year-old. You don't want to be in a close game based on what Georgia has shown at this point with that quarterback. That's a pick we barely even talk about because but so much has happened, but could definitely a low point in Carson Beck's season. So I say that to say, I don't think Kirby Smart loses this game to Lane Kiffin. Everything I know about college football tells me that Kirby Smart shows up with the plus 10 ratings on NCAA for all of his players. Everybody looks bigger, stronger, faster, and it doesn't make any sense. But Ole Miss turtles the way they do against the way they did against Oklahoma. And I understand they didn't do that against Arkansas last week, and a defensive coordinator, Travis Williams, that I respected a ton, and they exposed and carved them up because of how great Jackson Dart was. And today you could talk about the safeties and the similarities here. I get it, but every time Lane Kiffin has been in this situation, he has found a way to turtle and just get shelled. Every time Kirby Smart has been in this situation, not against Alabama, it has gone the same way. So I have to just trust Kirby Smart and say he's still the best coach in the sport. I'm not sure how he's going to win this game, but I think his defense is going to show up. Lane Kiffin's not going to want to be there. And that's what I see in Lane Kiffin in these big moments. That second half against LSU, the second half against Alabama last year, he just does not want to be in these big games. I don't know if he's still thinking about the Florida job because that's a little bit more fluid now. But I can't pick on logic here because that would say like an Ole Miss upset. I'm just going to say, how about them dogs?
To your point, so Jackson Dart is definitely had the better season than Carson Beck. And it doesn't make sense to say this, but if it's a last-minute drive and you're wondering who would you rather have?
Neither of these characters.
I'd still rather have Beck. I'd still rather have Beck in that spot.
Based on what? His biggest drives have ended in a fumble and a pick to an 18-year-old.
I think I would still argue the and I'm not saying that this negates. Again, I believe that the bad has outweighed the good clearly with Carson Beck. I still think that there have been moments, the drive that he put together down the stretch against Florida to be able to distance that lead when it was a tie game.
Well, they had me playing quarterback. I mean,
Florida. That's not their defense though. I mean, it's like
defense had 3 picks.
Exactly.
Right.
I'm acknowledging that. I'm fully acknowledging that. I'm saying late game scenario. I would look at even down the stretch against Kentucky when they're playing in a game that they shouldn't have been that close in. Obviously, what was the best play of the night? Well, it's a play in which you're backed up on your own end zone. You're able to hit Dom Lovett on a really nice timing throw in that spot. When if you're that rattled in that moment, you're not making that throw. You're just not. Texas drive. After everybody's
talking
going crazy.
about impressive throws against Kentucky, Dexter Dart might have him there. Remember when he was like going sideways, he hit his guy on 4th down, and then like
the Caden Prescore and throw, in the final drive, and then what happened?
That was a throw.
What happened after that, though?
I know.
That's more where I would push back on is that you could tell me that Jackson Dart has had 400 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, and Carson Beck's thrown 2 picks, and it's just not looked there. But gun to my head, who would I have more confidence in with a late game scenario? You need to go out and win a football game. God, I think I'm still taking Carson Beck. Is that sick? Is that sick to say?
I think both of these teams would rather not play in a close game. I think is when we just keep going because I'm arguing with myself here because I literally picked Georgia and I'm saying Carson Beck can't do that. I'm saying based on how Georgia has won historically, without Stetson Bennett, because Stetson Bennett would win this game going away. Without Stetson Bennett, they have proven, okay, we need to get the special teams play like they did against LSU. We need to get the defensive. We need to get a pick 6. We need to get that style of stuff, and I do trust them. I trust Georgia's team to the point where me liking Jackson Dart more than Carson Beck doesn't matter as much. And like I said, Kirby always finds a way. I picked against him, with Texas and with Tennessee. At some point, I have to stop the madness and go, this is Ole Miss. This is Lane Kiffin. You know who Lane Kiffin is. Don't let him win this game.
Yeah. I think Georgia can go 9-3 and make the playoff. I don't think Ole Miss can go 9-3 and make the playoff. Mm-hmm. If you're a Florida fan that wants Lane, a key caveat there. How conflicted are you watching this football game? Pretty conflicted, right? You want Lane to feel like he has maxed out his potential at Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. Whether that's true or not, that's how you want him to feel, okay? And if you want him, that means you want Georgia to win this football game. You don't want Ole Miss going 10-2, getting into the college football playoff, and then all of a sudden that process, like they're going to be playing a game December 21st. I think that's a really big part of this. If you are a Florida fan who wants Lane, if you don't want him, you're going to root against Georgia. I fully acknowledge that. But interesting dynamics all over the place with these two teams for just a juicy matchup that it feels like we've been talking about for a while.
Hey, Connor, who's going to be the leading rusher in this game?
Golly. Nate Frazier? By Nate Frazier?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because is Etienne banged up? Sorry.
Etienne's got the rib injury. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't know that he's going to be playing. He wanted to play apparently in the second half of that Florida game. Again, all of this is before availability reports come out. Matt Jones, sneaky leading rusher, the Ole Miss second stringer who has supplanted your boy Ulysses Bentley as a second stringer. Could get some run. Who's that? Dominic Thomas as well could be involved for Ole Miss. Yeah, it's a fair question to ask. No idea. Maybe Jackson Dart going to be the leading rusher in this one.
We have a real case for Jackson Dart here at this point. Anyway,
could be.